Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
There are some places in the country where parking is quite difficult to come by. It is a place to park your car. Depends on where you are. If you're out in the country and you got a big old driveway and a big old yard, you might have tons of space for cars. But some towns are more crowded than others. New York City, San Francisco. That's where this story is from. Several people sent me from ABC7 Chicago reporting the story, but out of San Francisco. Couple gets $1,500 fine threatened for parking in their driveway despite doing so for nearly 40 years. They've been parking there for 40 years. They just got notified, if you keep doing that, we're going to fine you $1,500. Michael Finney and Renee Curry wrote the story. And it seems quite unfair because they'd been using a car pad for decades when San Francisco sent them a notice, said where you're parking your car is illegal. If you keep doing it, we're going to fine you $1,500. So it all backs up to a time long ago where you had to find a place to park your car. So the couple here is Judy and Ed. And they said, we always use the carport, parked in that driveway every day and every night for the last 40 years. They live on a steep hill where parking, of course, can be difficult, but they could slip their car into their driveway and park on a car pad, which they've been doing actually for 36 years. And then he said, we got this email saying we can't park on that pad anymore. I said, what? That's crazy. Out of the blue, the couple got a ticket for parking in their own driveway. $1,542. Judy says it was very surprising to say the least. And worse, the $1,542 is a start. It's going to be $250 a day going forward if they keep putting their car on the car pad. So she said, I wrote them back saying I thought this was a mistake, but it was no mistake and no ordinary parking ticket. It came from the city planning department. So there, of course, is somebody who does parking enforcement on the streets, but this is from the city planning department. And they said if we were found parking there again, it'd be a $1,500 fine. And so there's some confusion about whether they actually got hit with a fine or threatened with a fine. So they moved their car, but they said, wait, huh? So Ed says, why are you taking away something that has great utility? Ed and Judy have been parking on that car pad for nearly 4 decades. And as far as they could tell, the space was used for parking since the house was built in 1910. The house was built in 1910. It was one of the first houses built in that neighborhood. And to all of a sudden be told you can't use something that we could use for years, it's startling, inexplicable, Ed said. So the planning department gave them a challenge. They said, prove that the parking was a historic use and they might give them a waiver. Well, interestingly enough, I would argue that 36 years is historic. If you've been doing this for 36 years, it's kind of hard for someone to come by now and say, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. But Judy said we'd be grandfathered in if we could show them a historical photo that showed a car or a buggy in the carport. They'd accept a horse and buggy. So they dug up a photo of their daughter from 34 years ago that showed a part of the car visible in that spot, but officials said it's not old enough. So where they're getting old from, we're not sure. So Ed said he did a bunch of online searches, combing through hundreds of historic photographs. Plenty showed the early days when there were few streets or homes. He said our house and our neighbor's house had empty fields all around it. But to find a photo of a car or a horse in that exact driveway, back before cameras were all that common, nearly impossible. And then Ed found an aerial photograph from 1938 that shows their home from above, and apparently there's a horse and buggy in that spot. He said, so this little black blob looks like it's pulling into our house. Now, of course, it looks like a blob. It's an aerial photograph taken in 1938. Ed says, however, it must be a car because that's what all the other blobs are on the road. I don't know what else they would be. To me, it's pretty compelling that that was a car pulling in or out of the parking pad. So they sent the photo over to the planning department. The planning department said, no, wrong. They said that the photograph was too fuzzy. Planning department said they need clear evidence, and that photograph wasn't clear evidence. Now, officials tell Channel 7 that the couple was violating a code section banning vehicles in a setback in front of a house, even if it isn't blocking a sidewalk. So it gets down to those rules about how close things can be to each other. It's okay to park in front of a garage, like many of the neighbors do, And the planning chief said that this law was enacted decades ago for aesthetic reasons to ensure that front yards don't turn into parking lots. But of course, when he says it was enacted decades ago, depends on how many decades, because these people have been parking there for almost 4 decades. So I don't think our car looks any worse than all the cars stacked in front of garages, Ed said. And why enforce the rule after all these decades have gone by? In an email, the planning department guy said, I recognize that the property owner is frustrated. I think I would feel the same way in their situation. But the planning code doesn't allow for the city to grandfather illegal uses on account of their having flown below the radar for a length of time. And so their carport sits empty. There's an oil stain on the driveway as they struggle to park on the hill. Judy says, I had to use my head to keep the trunk open while getting out groceries. The onus is on us to prove we're innocent, though I don't feel guilty. Now, the city did close the case without charging the $1,500 penalty after the couple got their car off the car pad and kept it off. And the city says they could build a covered carport or garage to park there, or, of course, if they can find an old photograph, that might do it. But as of right now, they're told that they cannot park on the spot they've been parking for 36 years because there's a rule that's been in place for decades saying you can't do that. I saw several different versions of the story. In one of the versions of the story, it said that a neighbor narked them out anonymously. And that's always the question, is who complained? Somebody must have complained and somebody did. It makes you wonder if the neighbor who complained has this rule being enforced against them and thought, well, if it's being enforced against me, it should be enforced against them. Why not, right? But the bigger question, of course, is if you've owned this property for 36 years and you've been using it this way openly for 36 years, for them to come along now and say, well, you can't do that because that's not a historic use of that spot. Again, I ask you, what's meant by historic? And the question is, of course, whether or not there is a definition of historic anywhere in the code. And the other issue, of course, is talking about whether you can grandfather in an illegal use. Well, if you make something illegal, before you made it illegal, it wasn't illegal. I know it's a mind bender. It's really early in the morning right now as I'm shooting this video. So if it's early in the morning where you are, I apologize for messing with your head this early in the morning. But it wasn't illegal before they declared it illegal. So to grandfather in the use wouldn't be that big of a deal. A bigger problem, I suspect, is if the planning commission or whoever's in charge of this decides to grandfather in these people. Other people are going to say, hey, why are you enforcing a rule against us? You ain't enforcing it against them. And they'd have to go through this every single time and go, look, these guys were there for 36 years and no one complained for 36 years. So that's why they get to do it. Well, I've been here 18 years. I've been here 12 years. And where do you draw the line? So I'm not saying I agree with the planning commission. I hope these people can find a clear photograph of a car parked in that spot. I hope so. But otherwise, it's a crazy story. But the couple did face a $1,500 fine for parking in their own driveway on their own car pad, despite having done it now for almost 40 years. ABC7Chicago.com ran this version of the story by Michael Finney and Renee Curry. And M, the letter M, not the singer with the song Pop Music, but M, sent me the story along with Chuck, Robert, Jeff, and Scott. Thanks a lot. Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Mark my words. Seriously, Mark, I need my words.